When Italian soldiers first opened American rations in 1943, they couldn't believe their eyes. After years of eating century-old hardtack, what they discovered would change everything. Welcome back to WW2 Studio. You know, there's a moment that doesn't make it into most history books, but it tells you everything you need to know about why World War II ended the way it did. Picture this. It's 1943, somewhere in Sicily or southern Italy, and an Italian soldier, hungry, exhausted, maybe captured, or maybe he has just switched sides after the armistice, opens an American military ration for the first time. Inside, he finds canned meat that's actually edible, crackers that aren't full of weevils, real chocolate, cigarettes, instant coffee with sugar, and even chewing gum. For a man who has been surviving on hardtack bake before the First World War, and maybe a spoonful of dubious canned meat if he is lucky, it's like opening a treasure chest. Some of these men genuinely thought it was a trick, that surely this couldn't be what the average American GI ate every single day. The stark contrast between Italian and American military rations during World War II tells a story that goes far beyond food. It reveals the industrial might, the logistical genius, and the simple human dignity that would help decide the war's outcome. When America went to war, it didn't just send men with rifles. It sent men with full stomachs, backed by a supply system that could deliver hot coffee and chocolate bars to the front lines thousands of miles from home. Meanwhile, Italian soldiers were often eating the same iron-hard biscuits their grandfathers might have carried in earlier wars, sometimes getting barely enough calories to stand up straight, let alone fight. This wasn't just about nutrition. This was about what kind of nation could afford to care for its fighting men, and what happened when soldiers on opposite sides realized the massive gulf between them. Now, if you appreciate these untold stories from the greatest generation, the ones that reveal the human reality behind the history, please take a moment to subscribe to WW2 Studio and hit that notification bell. We bring you authentic World War II history 3 times a week, diving into the details that textbooks skip over, but that tell us who these people really were. And folks, this is important. If you served, or if your father or grandfather served in World War II, please share your stories in the comments below. What did they tell you about the food? What do you remember them saying about life at the front? We read every single comment, and these memories need to be preserved while we still can. Your family's history is American history, and it deserves to be heard. So let me take you back to 1943 to a hungry Italian soldier somewhere in the Mediterranean theater opening his daily ration and wondering how much longer he can go on like this, not knowing that everything he thought he understood about this war is about to change. Let's start with what the average Italian soldier was actually eating during World War II, because the reality was far grimmer than most people realize. The backbone of Italian military rations was something called galette, hardtack biscuits that were so old, so incredibly ancient, that many of them had been manufactured before World War I. We're talking about food produced in the 1890s in some cases, stored in warehouses for decades, and then issued to soldiers in 1943. These weren't just stale crackers. They were rock-hard squares that could break your teeth if you bit down wrong, often infested with weevils and mold, requiring soldiers to soak them in water or wine just to make them edible enough to choke down. The Italian army also issued something called AM rations, Amministrazione Militare canned meat, which had such a terrible reputation that soldiers joked it stood for Arabo Morto, or dead Arab, because nobody could quite identify what animal it came from. The quality was so poor, so unappetizing, that men would trade it away for anything else they could get their hands on. Beyond that, Italian soldiers received meager portions of pasta when supply lines permitted, occasional bread that was often moldy by the time it reached the front, and sometimes a bit of cheese. The wine ration was often the most reliable part of their diet, which tells you something right there. Nutritionists who studied Italian military rations estimate that soldiers were receiving somewhere between 500 and 600 calories per day at the worst times, less than half of what a fighting man actually needs. These weren't men being prepared for combat. These were men slowly starving in uniform, expected to march, dig trenches, and fight while their bodies consumed themselves. Now contrast that with what American forces were eating, and you'll understand why Italian soldiers thought they were hallucinating when they first saw it. The United States military approached feeding its troops with the same industrial precision it applied to building tanks and planes. American quartermasters and food scientists had designed something revolutionary: portable, nutritious, shelf-stable rations that could keep a soldier fighting at peak efficiency anywhere in the world. The famous K-ration, developed by physiologist and Cell Keys, came in a waxed cardboard box about the size of a Cracker Jack container, but inside was a carefully calculated meal. You'd find canned meat, Spam, corned beef, or ham, along with crackers, a chocolate bar, a fruit bar, powdered coffee with sugar already mixed in, chewing gum for cigarettes, and even a wooden spoon and toilet paper. Everything a soldier needed, wrapped up and ready to go. The C-ration was even more substantial, with larger cans of meat and vegetables, and both types were designed to deliver more than 3,000 calories per day when consumed as intended. But it wasn't just about calories. American military planners understood something fundamental about morale. Men fight better when they feel cared for, when they know somebody back home is thinking about their comfort. That's why they included candy, why they threw in cigarettes and gum, why they kept rotating the menu so soldiers wouldn't eat the same thing day after day. The Quartermaster Corps tested these rations scientifically, measuring nutritional content, shelf life, and even taste. Behind every K-ration box was the full weight of American industrial capacity. Factories that could produce millions of rations, farms that could feed both the civilian population and the military ships that could transport it all across oceans, and a supply network that functioned like clockwork even under fire. The moment when these two worlds collided happened primarily after the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943, and then throughout the Italian campaign that followed. When American and British forces landed on Sicily's beaches, Italian soldiers got their first real glimpse of what the Allies could do, and it wasn't just the tanks and planes that shocked them. It was everything that came behind those frontline units. As the Allies pushed inland and Italian units surrendered or simply melted away, thousands of Italian soldiers found themselves as prisoners of war, and that's when the education really began. POWs were fed according to Geneva Convention standards, which in the American case meant they ate almost as well as American troops themselves. Italian soldiers who'd been surviving on centuries-old hardtack suddenly found themselves eating fresh bread, canned meat that was actually recognizable, real coffee, and chocolate. Many of them genuinely couldn't believe it. Then came September 1943, when Italy signed an armistice with the Allies, and the situation became even more remarkable. Italian units that switched sides and fought as co-belligerents alongside American forces were integrated into the Allied supply system. Now, you had Italian soldiers receiving American rations as part of their standard issue, and the psychological impact was staggering. These men would hold an American K-ration in one hand and remember the moldy hardtack they'd been choking down just weeks before, and the comparison told them everything about which side was winning this war. Word spread like wildfire through Italian ranks. Soldiers who were still fighting for the Germans heard from deserters and from civilians about what American troops ate, and it became devastating propaganda without anyone even trying. Some Italian soldiers reported that they initially thought the rations must be special provisions for elite American units, that surely the regular infantrymen couldn't be eating this well. When they learned the truth, that this was standard issue for every GI from privates to sergeants, the realization was crushing. They'd been lied to about everything. What these Italian soldiers were witnessing wasn't just better food. They were seeing the visible proof of America's staggering logistical superiority, the kind of organizational miracle that wins wars before the first shot is even fired. Think about what it took to feed millions of American servicemen spread across every theater of World War II. The United States had to manufacture billions of rations, package them, so they'd survive months at sea, and in extreme climates ship them across submarine-infested oceans on Liberty ships that were being built faster than the Germans could sink them, and then distribute them through supply chains that stretched from Normandy to North Africa to the Pacific Islands. Operations like the Red Ball Express, the famous truck convoy system that kept Patton's army supplied as it raced across France, moved thousands of tons of supplies daily, including food, ammunition, and fuel. This wasn't luck or improvisation. This was industrial capitalism operating at maximum efficiency, backed by a civilian population that was working around the clock in factories and farms to support the war effort. Meanwhile, the Axis powers were watching their logistics collapse. German soldiers were going hungry on the Eastern Front. Japanese troops in the Pacific were reduced to near starvation, and Italian soldiers were eating food their grandfathers had left behind. The contrast revealed something fundamental about how democracies and totalitarian regimes wage war. Democratic nations like America and Britain treated their soldiers as valuable assets worth investing in, understanding that a well-fed, healthy soldier fights harder and smarter than a starving one. Medical data from the war proves this beyond doubt. American casualties recovered faster, suffered fewer diseases, and maintained better combat effectiveness than Axis troops, and nutrition was a huge factor. But there was also a psychological dimension that's harder to quantify, but just as important. When an American GI opened his ration and found chocolate and cigarettes inside, he knew that somebody back home cared whether he lived or died, that he wasn't just cannon fodder to be expended. That knowledge translates into morale, and morale wins battles. The Italian soldier gnawing on hardtack from before his birth had no such comfort. The legacy of this moment, Italian soldiers discovering American rations, echoed long after the war ended. Italian veterans told their children and grandchildren about it, about the day they realized they'd been fighting for a regime that couldn't even feed them while the enemy ate like kings. Post-war Italy was flooded with American food aid through the Marshall Plan, and many Italians associated American generosity and abundance with those first rations their soldiers had encountered in 1943. The cultural impact was real and lasting. But the deeper lesson transcends any single nation or conflict. World War II was won in factories and farms as much as on battlefields. It was won by the nations that could organize their economies for total war while still maintaining the logistics to care for their fighting men. When you look at a simple K-ration box, you're looking at proof of concept. Proof that America could manufacture precision goods by the millions, ship them anywhere, and keep its soldiers fed and fighting at peak efficiency. That Italian soldier who opened an American ration in 1943 and couldn't believe his eyes was learning a hard truth. This war was already over, decided by industrial capacity and organizational genius long before the last shots were fired. The side that could put chocolate bars and instant coffee in every soldier's hands was the side that was going to win, because that level of care and capability extended to everything else they did. When those Italian soldiers opened American rations in 1943, they weren't just seeing better food. They were seeing the face of a nation that could afford to care for its soldiers, that had the factories, the farms, the ships, and the will to feed its men properly, even thousands of miles from home. Meanwhile, they'd been gnawing on hardtack baked before their fathers were born, sent to fight and die on empty stomachs by a regime that couldn't organize a supply line if its survival depended on it. And in the end, it did depend on it, and they failed. It's a small detail in the grand sweep of history, maybe something that seems trivial compared to the great battles and strategic decisions. But it tells you everything about why the war ended the way it did. The greatest generation didn't just fight with courage and determination. They fought with full stomachs, backed by a country that could produce miracles by the millions and deliver them to foxholes on the front lines. Folks, if this story moved you, if it gave you a new perspective on what our veterans endured and what made their victory possible, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to WW2 Studio. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the real stories of World War II. We're dedicated to preserving these memories before they're lost forever, and we need your help to keep these stories alive. And I genuinely want to hear from you. Did your father or grandfather serve in the Second World War? Did they ever talk about the food, about what they ate, about how they survived? What stories did they bring home? Leave a comment below, because I read every single one, and your family's history matters. These aren't just stories. They're the living memory of the generation that saved the world. Check our description for sources, veteran oral histories, and documentation about military rations. There's so much more to explore, and we've linked everything so you can dive deeper into this fascinating chapter of history. Next time you open your refrigerator or sit down to a meal without thinking twice about it, take just a moment to remember those men who fought on empty stomachs, and those who didn't have to because of the nation standing behind them. From all of us here at WW2 Studio, thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about these stories. And most of all, thank you to the greatest generation and all who served. We'll see you in the next video.